Nigeria is going through a rocky period at this time, and there's been call for revolution. With us in the studio to analyze the current political situation in the country is Comrade Gbenga Komolafe. It's a pleasure having you on Sahara TV again, sir.
The pleasure is mine. Thank you very much.
Like we said earlier, sir, the country is going through rocky periods at this point in time. Instability, turmoil, both in the political and the economic sphere. The government seems not to be able to govern, and the opposition doesn't seem to oppose, and the gap between the people and the state is getting wider. Let's first of all get your perspective on the efficiency or inefficiency of the present Buhari-led government to manage the current crisis. What's your view on this, sir?
Yeah, well, I think the President Muhammadu Buhari government has demonstrated basic incapacity to manage the conflicting interests in the Nigerian state. We have to also admit that the administration came in at a very turbulent period in Nigerian history. They inherited a lot of problems from the Jonathan administration. And, but actually that was also precisely the reason why the President Muhammadu Buhari government was voted in, because people had expectations that some of those specific problems that plagued the country under the previous administration will be addressed, particularly the crisis of governance. Under President Jonathan, it was such that corruption had become a defining feature of that government, as almost on a daily basis, reports of high-level haste, financial haste, involving top government functionaries of that government was always in the news. We were always inundated with reports of so much billion of dollars missing and all of that. And all of that was happening against the backdrop of infrastructure that had collapsed, and that both the previous Obasanjo government and the Jonathan government seemed helpless in addressing. Take an example of the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, which about 130-kilometer road, which the military built in a few years after the Civil War. And we suddenly discovered that that road could not be repaired, in the space of almost 20 years now. And that's just a metaphor for the general collapse of physical infrastructures, be it electricity, roads. Nobody even talks about potable water anymore in Nigeria. Nobody even talks about sanitation facilities, and so on and so forth. People have to provide electricity for themselves, and so on and so forth. So the expectation, and given the much vaunted anti-corruption pedigree of the person of President Muhammadu Buhari, the expectation was that it would come in to stem the tide, the downward slide in the country, curb corruption, and by dint of personal example, demonstrate utmost integrity and put some order and common sense into the management of public resources. But unfortunately, the government came in, and though we were made to wait for so long for the announcement of ministers, eventually the announcement came, and it was such a huge letdown, because a lot of the people that were appointed then were people that were, some of them were heavily smeared by the same corruption allegation. And the second coming seems to be even worse, because some of the politicians that have been in the news for high-level graft have also been reappointed by President Muhammadu Buhari. We also have to talk about the security situation. The fact that the insurgency in the northeast seem not to be letting down, and why new insurgent groups seems to be emerging. People talk about the herdsmen that have made life insecure virtually all over the country. People also talk about some faceless bandits that have literally overrun a lot of states in the northwest part of the country. And all of these also can be linked to increasing food scarcity because a lot of farming communities have been displaced by the activities of this banditry. And the government seems to be helpless in curbing these violent insurgencies. In the social scene, we all know education remains what it is, completely comatose. In states, in heavily populated states like Lagos, we still have a situation where people have to cope with 130, 120 children per class. The teachers are overstressed. The facilities for effective learning are not there. The level of administration at the higher colleges and institutions is nothing to write home about. We are familiar with the incessant stories of strikes and by university and college teachers all over the country. So this has been the reality, and it will not be an exaggeration to describe the situation as very explosive. And of course, a lot of people talk about this in the privacy of their homes, in formal and informal meetings, openly and otherwise.
From extensively, we will say that the country at this point is rotten ripe for a revolution?
Well, my candid opinion is that it's overripe. We'll be talking of endemic social crisis for quite a long while. It's because of the crisis of legitimacy of the Nigerian state that we had the military coup of 1983 that brought in President Buhari as a military head of state at that time. And interestingly, part of the mantra then in 1983 was that they were going to stop corruption. Then we all know the story. Then Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida military junta kicked those ones out. They came in, and corruption now became the culture, way of life of the people, and why all the levers of development in the country actually nosedive under the Babangida administration. Then the civilians came in, but interestingly, the military managed to actually hand over to civilian clones of themselves. And so we discovered that active functionaries under the military are also the ones that have amassed sufficient wealth to dominate the political space, such that genuine patriotic forces who try to also intervene in the political arena are easily frustrated out. Because over time, since 1999, the political situation is such that it's become heavily monetized. Even positions as simple and rudimentary as councillors. To contest for such positions, you have to have heavy amounts of money, which most honest people cannot afford. And so this political space is left open only for those who have access or who have had access to the looting of state resources, which enables them to buy their way through the political process into power. And so you have a leadership recruitment process that is endemically corrupt and that is fundamentally rigged against the interests of the majority of the suffering masses of Nigeria.
That's right. There seems to be apparent lack of information and lack of transparency from this government, and when it comes to decision making by this government. Let's hear your perspective on what kind of revolution that this country deserves at this time, because some are of the opinion, or they feel, that Nigeria is half primed for a violent revolution at this time. So what kind of revolution are we talking about?
Well, I do not really subscribe that a revolutionary process needs to be violent, because we've also had a lot of violent revolutionary upheavals in several other countries within and outside the African context that are not ended very well. So you come back to wonder what was the whole bloodshed and upheaval about at the end of the day. The contemporary experience has shown that it's also possible to have a relatively peaceful revolutionary transition. Though the aims and objective of the Arab Spring was largely aborted, but the fact remains that the issues the Arab Spring raised remains pertinent and still determines the political reality in the Middle East up to today. We have the situation in Sudan, and right now we also have a revolutionary situation in Hong Kong and Puerto Rico, where a government has actually been forced to resign. So it is possible to get our people organized and to come out in massive numbers to express their rejection of a present system that has become fundamentally rigged against the interests of the majority to the benefit of very few people. You can almost count on your fingertips.
Buhari is the face of this regime, but beneath him, there is an extensive system of corruption and organized establishment of criminals. Do you think that all of this will disappear just because Buhari had to go, for example?
No, it cannot be about Buhari. It has to be about a system that has rendered poor President Buhari ineffective. It is generally acknowledged that the person of, though a lot of people also will contend that with that statement, that the person of General Buhari is generally honest and you know, has the basic confidence. I mean, inspired the kind of confidence that always makes some people to clutter around me as a figure that could instill some level of order and common sense into governance. Even when he was a soldier, we had the same scenario. He was brought in to lead a military push that had top on his agenda the issue of addressing corruption and so on. How it fared then also is also subject to a lot of debates, but we can say that the perception of the President of Buhari as a generally honest person persisted to the extent that people still congregated around him to still want to exploit that popular image to get back to power under the present dispensation. So it cannot be about the personal dispensation or orientation of one person. It certainly has to do with a system that is fundamentally entrenched in a very systemic way in corrupt and anti-people way of doing things and managing resources that belongs to everybody.
So in what ways
so it will appear that despite the relative honesty of the person of Buhari, the system has managed to completely rubbish that pedigree.
So in what ways now can Nigeria manage a peaceful and inclusive revolutionary transition now?
There must be a movement, a mass movement, a mass organized movement that is organically linked to all the levers of the social and cultural life of our people must evolve to aggregate popular interest and aspirations for development. That means such a movement must also be programmatic, must have a visionary program that apprehend our history of underdevelopment and continuous abortion of our developmental aspirations since independence, and come out with statements that realistically addresses those issues and problems, with also a coherent program of what to do about specific situations and sectors that have been badly battered by the continuous mismanagement and misrule that we have been subjected to. We expect a government that will address the issue of redeveloping the destroyed productive base. It is important to emphasize that the productive base of the economy, a program that will get our people back to work, a program that will reindustrialize. What we had under Babangida with his policies of structural adjustment was that it was a comprehensive program of deindustrialization. Under that program, hundreds of enterprises have been closed down. And unfortunately, under the Obasanjo government, that program was continued. And not just the public sector was not affected, even the private sector was also battered because of the over-liberalization of the economy and the influx of all manner of junk from every part of the world. We literally became the junkyard of the whole world. So local industry simply collapsed. The textile sector is always a popular reference, where the population of workers declined from over 500,000 at its peak in the 80s to less than 20,000 now, with over 300 factories closed down. So we must get our industry revitalized. We must build our productive base. We must get our people back to work. We must get young people back to work. All this silly talk of entrepreneurial training, and everybody is training how to do interior decoration, how to do fashion designing, and makeup artists and all this nonsense, does not address the challenge of getting our economy to become productive. By the 80s, our productive base was about 14%. The manufacturing sector contributed about 14% to the GDP. Now it's over between 3 and 4%. In a country that graduates almost 500,000 young people from colleges every year. That cannot continue. It's a perfect recipe for absolute disaster. As a matter of fact, if we don't have a peaceful mass movement that will lead the revolutionary process of change, we are all sitting on kegs of gunpowder, because we have an explosive situation of young people who are not even used to a modern industrial culture of work, because there are no industries to socialize them to the 21st century values of going to work, having the experience and the discipline of the modern workspace. We have a whole generation of young people who have never had that experience. All this talk about vocational training and all really cannot address that situation. The development paradigm that has violently desecrated the Constitution of Nigeria, which provides for government to control and manage the commanding heights of the Nigerian economy. A constitutional provision which informed the early vision of the Nigerian founding fathers, which had development pathway, developmental plans. We used to have development plans that spanned periods of 10 years. We had development plans that provided that government must invest in building an upstream sector, which is the base for industrialization in any country of our size particularly. That's why they talk about Jakarta, Alaja steel rolling mill, the inland steel rolling mills in Osogbo, Katsina, Jos. The vision was to input the ingots, iron rods and all of that from the Ajaokuta to all these inland rolling mills that will now go into the machine tools companies that produce the basic spare parts and machinery which your Cadbury or Lever Brothers would now use. Because those kind of industry are actually useless. You have a Cadbury that even imports cocoa concentrates. You export raw cocoa, you bring in cocoa concentrate. You have to import machinery, you have to import spare parts, you have to. So these are just assembly plants. You are really not doing anything here. And even those ones, most of them have been frustrated out of the Nigerian industrial scene because of the horrible policies we had under Obasanjo. We must rethink our developmental paradigms. We must go back to the era of conscious developmental planning and visioning so that we can get our people back to work.
Let me get this, because it will be remiss if I do not ask you this question during the course of this interview. A one-time Labour leader and now turned politician, the national chairman of the All Progressive Congress, Comrade Adams Oshiomhole, has called on organized labor to challenge political leaders to ensure that state resources meet the needs of workers and other Nigerians. In his statements, let me quote him, just to tell you that from inside, I am much more convinced that unions should not only exist, but should have the capacity and ruthlessly deploy that capacity to ensure that the resources of states are dissipated in favor of working people and working families. This was the statement of the former NLC president.
Yeah.
Doesn't it sound ironical?
Oh, well.
What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I agree absolutely with that statement that trade unions and other organizations of the working people must be alive to their responsibility of checkmating the downward slide that we are all experiencing in all sectors.
So what has happened? What has happened?
But I agree. I also agree.
Isn't that an indictment on the labor movement itself?
Well, it's an indictment on Mr. Oshiomhole himself, who was not only a labor leader, but who was a very influential voice in the labor movement, and perhaps he still is, and who also have the privilege of playing prominent role in our contemporary political experience that he has not really practicalized what he has verbalized there, you know. So I agree with you that there's a lot of irony there, you know. So it will seem that our ruling class, possibly because of their greed, or maybe just the system that makes it impossible for them, are incapable of actually doing the right things when they know the right things. Yes, the labor movement has a lot of role to play, and that cannot be overemphasized. But I've always also pointed out to people who seem to have too much expectation of what the role of labor, organized labor, should be. You know, organized labor could be a powerful voice, especially in terms of enunciating economic policies that could overall advance the interest of workers and not working people, which they are not doing right now. But the point also remains that really I've not seen anywhere in the world where trade unions lead revolution. I've not seen it done anywhere. They could be of enormous influence in the political process. It could also be a veritable recruitment ground of tested individuals and visionaries, you know, into the political space, you know. But unfortunately, that's not happening here. And it's also one of the paradoxes of development, and we have to address.
Let me ask this question finally. What can be done to keep the revolution alive and make the changes that the protesters and movements like the Coalition for Revolutionary and other movements are actually agitating for, especially towards the August 5 Days of Rage revolution?
Yeah, I think I'll be very emphatic about this. The August 5 initiative is welcome. A lot of quarters have expressed reservations. But to the extent that most honest Nigerians, most working people in Nigeria who are the receiving end of the present rot, agree that things are simply not working, agree that we simply cannot continue like this. To that extent, I think we should welcome any initiative from any quarter whatsoever to challenge what's going on right now and put forward an alternative program of development in accordance with the Nigerian Constitution, particularly Chapter 2 of the Nigerian Constitution, which made abundant provisions for the kind of economic and social relations that should obtain in our country. But unfortunately, that constitution has been violently desecrated because our ruling class, particularly in 1999, have consciously subverted the provisions of the Constitution that the economy, the commanding heights of the economy should be controlled by the government, that the business of government should be primarily geared towards the welfare and well-being of all Nigerians. And as we have in section 16(2)(d) particularly, that the need of Nigerians for adequate food, I'm almost quoting it, shelter, housing, education, healthcare must be provided by the Nigerian state. All of these have been abandoned. All of these have been ignored by an alternative vision that seeks to put the economy and the productive levels of the economy in the hands and pockets of very few people. Today we have a situation where the inequality coefficient has become one of the highest in the whole world, which could never have even been dreamt of, in the bad 1980s. We now have a situation where you have 5 people controlling the world that the entire budget of 200 million Nigerians cannot even meet up with. One individual is supposedly $25 billion rich. What's our budget? So we have had a process of over-concentration, of wealth in the hands of very few people. We have our productive forces destroyed over time, completely rendering our people useless and jobless. That must be reversed, because if we don't reverse it, honestly, Boko Haram is going to be a child's play.
Thank you very much, Comrade Gbenga Komolafe.